Guys, good evening. Mitch Taco Bell. I'm your host for Tall Tales with Taco. As you can tell, this is pre-recorded. It's a beautiful sunny afternoon on Friday, December 3rd. Yesterday, I had the great honor to drive 60 World War II veterans from DFW Airport back to their hotel, where American Airlines is flying them out to Honolulu for the 80th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. I'm sporting just an awesome shirt here, 80th anniversary. And those folks get to go out there for an all-expense paid trip. That is just a lot of it brings back closure for the folks that were there and also gratitude for the folks that served. We had folks, veterans spanning Pearl Harbor attack all the way through D-Day. We had waves, we had nurses, we had just an incredible collection of people at our hotel last night. Unfortunately, I was only able to capture about 4 stories or 3 stories from 4 different folks. I had 2 tank destroyers that got on to. Ladies and gentlemen, Mitch Taco Bell, and I am here with Jack Holder, who on the 13th of this month will turn 100 years old. He is one of the few living survivors from Pearl Harbor and still around to talk about it. Incredible career. I want Jack to give you guys just a little backstory on where he was back in 1941, December 7th. Why don't you go ahead and tell the folks?
Okay, 1941. Well, actually, when the conflict started, I had been in Hawaii already 6 days short of 1 year. When the conflict started, I had the duty that day, which means you stay aboard and stand watch or whatever's necessary.
And what ship were you on?
It was not on a ship. I was attached to a PBY patrol squadron. PBY is it was commonly referred to as the Catalina flying boat. The hull of the aircraft it looks just like a boat. In fact, it could be a boat with a wing and 2 engines on it. It was built in 1935 strictly for search and rescue.
Now, you were a flight engineer on that, right?
I was a flight engineer on this aircraft, yes.
So you sat up in between in that pillar. They had a little position for you up there.
Right up in the crown portion underneath the center of the wing, yeah.
Yeah. Now, were you a mechanic as well?
I was a mechanic as well, rated mechanic, yeah.
Jeez. So you were there, and do you remember the airplanes flying overhead?
Well,
did you see any of the attack?
I seen a lot of it. I had the duty that day, as I said. We just fell in for muster at 8 o'clock when the section leader began roll call. We heard a screaming aircraft, and moments later, a terrible explosion. We ran outside the hangar, and the sky was full of aircraft with the rising sun insignia on the bottom of the wing. We knew exactly what had happened. I've been masked so many times, I guess. You know what my thoughts were at that time. And thoughts were many. Surprise, anger, whatever, you know. But it was a terrible sight. One of my shipmates remembered there was a sewer line under construction behind our hangar. He says, "Let's go for the ditch. Follow me." We all ran, jumped in the ditch. One of the pilots seen us, strafed the ditch with machine gun fire, missing us by probably 3 feet. He hit the dirt piled up beside the ditch.
Jeez.
I can still see his face as he made his approach.
And so they ended up making you man a machine gun for 3 days after the attack?
Yeah, you know, as soon as this started, of course, martial law was declared and a complete blackout over all the Hawaiian Islands. And late in the afternoon, machine gun pits constructed from sandbags were set up all around Fort Island. And I had I had the pleasure, along with two shipmates, manning one of them for 3 days and nights. We had no idea where the Japanese fleet was or if they planned on returning, but every ship noise and every aircraft noise we heard, we knew it was them coming back. Fortunately, that didn't happen.
And so you spent the rest of the war flying PBYs?
No. When the 2 or 3 days after that, we started back doing exactly what we'd done before, training and so forth. But well, let me give you a little more detail on it. When Jimmy Doolittle made the raid over Tokyo, the Japanese was filling the sky with coded messages using the letters AF and AO. We had broken the Japanese code to a point. We knew one of them stood for the Aleutian Islands and the other one stood for Midway, but could not determine which one. Chief of Naval Intelligence told Admiral Nimitz, he said, I figured out a plan to tell what they mean. He said, we could send out an uncoded message saying Midway has just had a freshwater condenser failure. Nimitz said, send it. Immediately, the Japanese sent out a coded message saying AF has just had a freshwater condenser failure. We then knew what the letters stood for, but we did not know if their plans were to strike Midway or the Aleutian Islands. Nimitz believed it would be Midway. Washington was not in a full accord. They sent a courier to talk to Nimitz and asked him, says, what if you're wrong? He said, did Washington send you here to tell me not to go to Midway? He said, no. He said, then you return to Washington. He then sent a small task force to the Aleutian Islands under disguise, of course. And Yamamoto took the bait again. He says the American Navy is moving towards the Aleutians, will now take Midway.
That's awesome. So did you do patrols looking for the Japanese fleet?
When following that, Nimitz sent all of our fleet to the two Midways, stationing the carriers in one location and the rest of the fleet in another. My squadron left Pearl Harbor April 26th, went to Midway, and started the search for the Japanese fleet. On June the 3rd, we found them 450 miles northeast of Midway, moving towards Midway under a weather front. We reported their position and went back to Midway, of course. Next day, they struck Midway, June 4. So happens that the Marines on Midway were equipped with 27 Brewster Buffalo fighters that were no match at all for the Japanese Zero. They sent 27 aloft, and only 7 of them returned, and they were damaged beyond further flight. For the first 2 hours, we were definitely losing the battle. The Hornet launched 30 torpedo planes, only 1 man returned, Ensign Gay.
Right.
They then launched 15 more, only 4 of those returned. 45 aircraft, we lost 40. But this was the time when the tide was about to turn. We had spotted part of the Japanese fleet and reported their position. We had 3 squadrons of dive bombers in the air, led by Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey. airborne 2 hours, running low on fuel, but he says we're going to press on just a little longer. Moments later, he seen the white wake of a fast-moving destroyer, and he says that ship has to be racing to join the main fleet. We'll follow it. And moments later, they did. They found 3 aircraft carriers diving from 20,000 feet. They inflicted sufficient damage to sink all 3 carriers. They were aided by 2 factors. Japanese fighters were at low altitudes protecting their own ships against our torpedo planes. And Admiral Nagumo had received word that damage to Midway was slight. He said, we'll rearm with bombs and go back to Midway. Yamamoto said, no, we'll rearm with torpedoes and go after their fleet. While they were rearming,
They caught them with their pants down.
Caught them with their pants down.
Now, did you guys do any in-flight rescue during the battle? Because I remember watching a movie. Maybe that was Sinking of the Battleship, Yamamoto.
All of our rescue was the next day.
The next day you were able to find guys?
But I was airborne at 4 o'clock that morning, armed with 4 500-pound bombs. Early in the afternoon, we struck gold. We found a Japanese sub surfaced. All hatches were closed. No one was on deck. We dropped 2 bombs, one on the fantail, one behind the conning tower. We made 6 circles around it, watching it sink.
It's a pretty good kill right there.
Yes, it was. And later on, we had lost all radio contact with Midway. We didn't know if we still controlled the island or the Japanese had it. We had an option. We could take a chance on going back to Midway, or we could set out to sea. We dropped our 2 remaining bombs unarmed, set out to sea, drifted all night. Early the next morning, we finally made contact with Midway. We learned that we had been successful. We'd also told there was a destroyer at the French frigate show loaded with aviation fuel. We took sun shots, found our position, went to the shows, refueled, went to Midway. And as you said, the next day we were out looking for downed seamen.
Right.
Late in the afternoon, we found 2 gentlemen in a life raft. But we were low on fuel at the time. We radioed a sister ship. They landed, took them to Midway.
Oh, awesome.
Next day, we returned to Pearl Harbor. Had 5 glorious days at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. But that was short-lived.
Right.
July the 2nd, we were on our way to Guadalcanal.
Oh, man. PBY is a great airplane. That
was a great airplane.
Fly forever and, fly around at 90 knots and be able to do a lot of surveillance. And,
cruising speed out there was 130 miles an hour. But
wow.
These were PBY 5s. They were only 2 weeks old. We just returned from San Diego with them, brand new aircraft.
Right.
Of course, they were apart between BP-21's hangar and ours, which is only 100 yards apart. And when the first bomb fell in Pearl Harbor, was BP-21's hangar. But the explosion from it set fire and damaged a lot of our aircraft.
Is that the famous picture on Ford Island?
That's it.
With the PBY kind of broken and on fire?
That's it.
Sailors standing there?
Yeah. That's it.
That's amazing.
Yep.
And what was the mood? I mean, I know the mood, but the days after Pearl Harbor, pretty dark. Angry? What, you guys ready to jump in the battle?
It was a lot of anger, you bet. And I've had a lot of people ask me, Mitch, why I wanted to go to Midway. One word, revenge.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Would you have Anything you would like to tell the folks out there? Pass on words of wisdom. Any words of wisdom?
Well, for years I blamed Admiral Kimmel and General Short, but come to find out they didn't know any more about it than I did. But, I'm sure you know this. We had listening stations set up. Had 5 listening stations set up, one in the Philippines, one in Wake Island, one in San Francisco, and 2 in Seattle, I think.
Mm-hmm.
By triangulation of it, every morning they could spot the Japanese fleet to FDR and Admiral Stark, and they knew their position every morning.
That's amazing.
Speculation is now that FDR wanted this to happen so we could join the British
in the war, right?
In the war,
right?
And hindsight, this is a hell of a thing to say, but it might have been a good thing. If Britain had gone under, we would have no place to go.
Right. Amazing. Well, I really appreciate it. I wish I could go out with you guys, and I hope your trip out there is successful. Well done trip. You've earned the return, and so nice to meet you, sir.
Well,
really great.
Same here. Now, let me just add one thing, Mitch. I participated in both theaters in 1943 when we finally got Guadalcanal under control. I received orders to travel to San Diego to help commission the new PBY squadron and return to the Pacific. But when I got there, my orders were changed. I started training in the B-24 Liberator, spent 2 months there training, moved to Argentia, Newfoundland for another 2. April 1943, I was in Dunkswell, Devonshire, England, where I spent 15 months patrolling anti-submarine patrol of the English Channel and the Bay of Biscay, which is the western coast of France.
Now, was that Navy B-24s with the T-tail, not the
same, just like the Army had, just like the Air Force had.
Really?
Double tail.
Oh, I didn't know we had those.
No, most people don't.
Yeah.
They was trying to control the enormous amount of U-boats in the channel with PBYs, which was not effective. The Navy commissioned 5 squadrons of B-24s. I was in the first one, BB-103. The 5 squadrons flew 6,464 missions, sunk 8 submarines, and damaged 4 more. I got credit for one of them.
Oh, that's awesome. So in your career, you got 2 submarines.
Right.
That's outstanding. That is outstanding. Well, you are certainly the giants. We rest on the shoulders of giants, just like you, and can't thank you enough.
Oh,
I can't thank you enough.
Mitch. I enjoy it. Thank you.
And you have a great trip over to Hawaii, and folks, we'll give you an update. I'll post this on December 7th. Until then, hoorah, Semper Fi.
Okay, thank you.
Well, folks, I have the Army in the house. I have 2 tank destroyers that are going on the trip over to Honolulu for the 80th anniversary of Pearl Harbor. But these fine gentlemen were over in Europe fighting and slugging it out against the Germans. I'd like you to go ahead and, Jack, go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Wilbur Jack Myers, but I go by Jack most of the time, and that's the way it has been. But my name is Wilbur. But anyway, we went into France right after the invasion through Cherbourg, and as soon as we got in there, we loaded up and we got orders to go to Holland and liberate them with British soldiers and up there in Market Garden.
Market Garden, right?
Yeah. So we liberated them, and then we came down and went to the Siegfried Line, and we were going up there, and then we got a call from General Patton to go over and help him out in the Battle of the Bulge. And that was something else too. But
And your partner in crime here, Bill, introduce yourself. Bill.
Yeah, I'm Bill Casazza of the 638th Tank Destroyer Battalion. We landed in the Cherbourg area of France directly from Brooklyn. And when we got our gear together, we went into the line for the first time with the 84th Infantry Division in the border between the 9th Army and the British 2nd Army, where we hit the Siegfried line at a town called Gallenkirchen. And Gallenkirchen was part of the Siegfried line, which was quite an experience for us because we had been trained to do something entirely different from what we were doing. What we were doing was close-in support to the infantry, but we were organized, as Jack might have mentioned, in battalions, and a battalion effort would always be made in concert. But when we got attached to the infantry, where we were scattered out throughout a division, our battalion was scattered company by company and platoon by platoon throughout the 84th Division. And we fought with them from there until the end of the war. We went into the Siegfried line, almost to penetrating it at the Rohr River. And then at that time, the Bulge happened. The Germans attacked on the 16th of December, and our battalion was pulled out of the line and sent down to help find where the Germans were, which sounds funny because here they were making this huge advance, and still we had to find them because you're in Belgium, it's all hills and forests and little tiny roads, and you could have a division go by you within a half a mile and not even know it. So it was a reconnaissance job there for quite a while, and it was simply done to try to locate and the parameters of the German attack. So, but by Christmas time, we had it pretty well lined up. We were from this line of the town of Marsh to the town of Houghton. And from that time, we were defensive, but by the first day of January, we went on the offensive and continued across the, cutting the Bulge, as they called it, in half, and nipped it off and met the units from the Third Army that had come up. The Third Army had turned, made a left-hand turn, so to speak, and cut through. And anyway, we contacted them there, and I'm trying to remember the name of the town, but it won't come to mind, as often happens
until
nowadays.
2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah,
but
yes, exactly.
What kind of tank did you drive?
It was not a tank. It was a tank destroyer. It was called the M18 Hellcat, which was a high-speed, fully tracked vehicle that mounted a 76 millimeter cannon and a 50 caliber machine gun. It could go like hell over rough terrain, smooth terrain, you name it. It could go there.
Yeah.
And how about you, Jack? Do you have the same thing?
No. Up until the Battle of the Bulge was over, we fought with a half-track and a 75 millimeter towed gun on the back of it. So it was, but we trained that way in Camp Hood, Texas, before we came over, so we were able to do it. But it was a pea shooter compared to the 88. So, but we had tactics, we had smart battle tactics to overcome it anyway.
Right.
To get around in the back of it, like the Tiger, we couldn't knock it out except we hit it from the rear end.
Right.
But they had an 88 there, and that would revolve and knock us out too. See, so it was a challenge, but we got through it. And when we got to the Ruhr River, we couldn't get across because the bridges were bombed out by us, of course. But one thing that is very important and people love it is on Christmas Eve we got a command to stop firing, and so did the Germans. And here I was sitting there in perfectly quietness, and the Germans started to play Christmas carols across the river with their band.
Really?
And we sang with them. Isn't that wonderful? Well, in Germany, I don't know if Bill knows about it, but in a German house, there was a crucifix on almost every wall. So they were some Christians there too.
Yeah.
And I didn't hate my enemy because I just felt that he had to do it. He couldn't say no to Hitler. you know?
Right.
But anyway, when we crossed that Ruhr River, another important thing is we got an M36 that replaced that half track with a 90 millimeter on it.
90 millimeter gun.
And boy, when we crossed that river, did I wake the Germans up. Wow. I really enjoyed it. I mean, I tell you the truth about it. And then we drove from there to the Rhine, and we couldn't get across there either.
Yeah.
So we took Cologne there, and it was excuse my language, it was a hell of a fight, but we won it, and we celebrated that up and down the streets, man. I tell you, it was great. Then we got a command to go to southern France with this 90 millimeter, and we took our destroyers back and put them on flat cars, railroad flat cars, and went down there and drove through southern France, taking village by village and high places, and just winning battle after battle after battle, village after village after village. And we got there, liberated Dachau near the end of the war.
Yep.
So a lot of experiences, and like Bill and I talk about, we're proud to be tank destroyers, really.
Were you all friends before the war started?
No.
Had you all met during the war?
No, we met at the tour like this.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Now, where do you live?
I live in Hagerstown, Maryland.
Maryland? And how about you, Bill?
Shawnee, Kansas.
I know Shawnee, Kansas. I know Hagerstown. I grew up in Arlington. I was stationed in Kansas City. So
How about that?
used to go, I was in Lee Summit, Missouri.
Oh, yeah.
Kansas City, Lee Summit. But
It's all part of
Kansas City.
But I want to tell you, I'm sure Bill is like I am. I just love these tours where I meet guys like Bill.
So far, it's been terrific.
And how old are you? How old are you now?
I'm 96.
96. And how old are you?
98.
98. So how old were you when you got into the Army, into the fight? 16, 17?
I enlisted when I was 17, called into active duty when I was 18. Got discharged from the Army when I was 20.
Wow.
I was 19 when I was drafted.
Did you guys get a Purple Heart? Did you get wounded?
I didn't get wounded. I got scratched a million times, but I never got a wound.
Well, that's the way it me. I didn't either. But
did you ever go up against the Tiger tank?
Oh yeah, we did.
No, I never have, and I'll tell you why. First of all, there were very few Tigers around, frankly.
Yeah.
And we had 5/8 of an inch of armor, which is little stop rifle rounds.
So you felt like that.
It goes through and
No,
rattles
that was
around,
it.
right?
That was it. That's anything else point you.
How about Panzers? Did you take out a
Well,
bunch of Panzers? How many kills did you get?
There was, first of all, the word Panzer in German is what they used to describe all of their tanks. But they did have a Panther tank, which was their number 2, and they had a lot of them. It was about a 60, well, not a 60 ton, I think it's a 48-ton tank. The Tigers started at 60, and there were 3 different kinds of Tigers, and there's a lot of stories about that. But anyway, those tanks had anywhere in the frontal piece, they might have 4 inches of armor. And if up on the, probably thinking of the wrong word, but it's the mantle that's around the base of the tube of the cannon. And those tanks would be probably 8 inches of armor. So you tried not to get in front of them because you didn't stand a chance with them.
Did you watch the movie Fury by chance?
You could move fast, and that was your only way to get around them. And as Jack pointed out, get a side shot, a flanking shot, or better all if you get them from the rear.
Did you see the movie Fury by chance?
Don't know if I have or not.
It just came out.
No.
Yeah, and it was Sherman's against the Tiger tank and all this stuff. So
Yeah, the first tour I took in 2014 was to celebrate the victory in that war, and I had a chance to see the Tiger tank and learn about the actual. It was, as I recall now, buddy, It was 72 tons.
The Tiger Royal.
Yeah, Tiger Royal. And I couldn't knock it out from the front or the
You
side.
could shoot at them all day long.
But what we did, we knocked the tracks off of them. Now you had to be careful because they had a swivel 88 on there. We got some tanks knocked out, but we did have tremendous leaders and tactics that we could get it. We would come in with our weapon, maybe a lot of directions at one time, and try to divulge their attention, And then when some of them would sneak in the back and try to knock them out.
Gotcha.
So you just had to find a way to do it, but it was a terrific weapon, and I was glad to get that 90. I'm telling you, boy.
Yeah, it was a whole nother kettle of fish from the 90. That vehicle, M36.
Oh, that's a great,
That was really you could do business with
great
them.
vehicle, yeah.
But what we did mainly in my unit was to support the infantry and close-in support.
Oh, yeah.
And I have nothing but respect for the infantry. We got shot at a lot ourselves, believe me, and a lot of artillery fire.
Right.
Because we were with the infantry, we got a lot of, and of course the infantry had a mixed emotions about us. On the one hand, they loved the support that we provided in certain conditions. On the other hand, we drew fire. And they hated us. When they knew we were going to draw fire, they go away.
I did get a Bronze Star for saving a bunch of men, and like he said, we supported the infantry, and we were pinned down. We couldn't move for days, and they were wounding people and killing. And my platoon leader came over and he said, "Myers, I want you to put a HG shell in that window." And I had the 90 then. And if I put the crosshairs on, I had it. So I put a high explosive shell in that window. And after it got in there, it exploded. From then on, we can move on unimpeded. But let me add one thing. I was just doing my duty.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about an award. But the War Department, after I got out, they sent me this certificate of appreciation and a Bronze Star. And that's great. You know what I mean?
That's nice. Yeah. Well, you guys deserved a lot more than that.
Oh, yeah.
Well, gentlemen, I'm going to wrap this up. You all have an awesome trip out in Honolulu. I hope you enjoy it. You're well deserved. And on behalf of my airline, American Airlines, thank you so much for what you did. Thank you so much.
I noticed a little something on your chest.
Oh, yes, sir.
We expect to enjoy it, and we enjoy your interest in it and enjoy you interviewing us.
Well, thanks. Let me sign off here. So this will be Tall Tales with Jack and Bill, and signing out. Here we go. So how many hours did you have when you got over there, and what year did you go?
I went over there in the summer of 1944. I graduated from cadets in March of 44, and then went to fighter transition school in Tallahassee, flying P-40s of all things. P-40 Warhawks. And went over as a P-51 replacement pilot. I'd never been on a P-51 until I got over there. But so then after some training in England for a couple of weeks, went over to A1 with the first airstrip behind the beachhead in Omaha Beach, St. Mary Église. But then when that was disbanded, you went to this 406 fighter group, which was down at Le Mans at that time, flying out of temporary strips.
Mm-hmm.
The engineers just leveled out a spot and made an airstrip and flew from it. So that was my. But we got to Le Mans one day, and the operations officer, we were living in tents. The operations officer took me out and sent me in a P-47 the first time I'd seen one, and he said, "Take it around, try it out." He said, "I'll just warn you, this thing's heavy. You've got to carry power on the approach." So
that was your checkout.
That was my checkout.
You're kidding. So the guy's like, "All right, here's the flaps. Here's the mixture. Here's this."
We did a cockpit run through. So
right.
But it wasn't really a thing deal. So sure enough, on approach to landing, I was down about 50 feet off the ground, still a quarter of a mile from the strip. So put on the power and went around and made a normal landing. And the next day I flew my first combat mission.
Wow.
One landing.
How many hours did you have total at that time?
Well, probably 300, I suppose, 300 hours in training.
Right.
And but it's not as wild a situation because the P-47 was such an easy airplane to fly.
Yeah.
It didn't have any nasty characteristics as the Mustang had.
It had wider gear too, didn't it?
Big wide, 15 feet spacing. So it was heavy. So when it got on the ground, it stayed on the ground.
And so when did you transfer from the P-47s to the P-38?
I never flew P-38.
Oh, I thought you flew P-38s as well.
No.
Oh, okay. Just
P-30
47s.
Yeah, 47. Did all of my missions in P-47.
Did you get to tangle with the Germans at all? Get some air to air?
Only that wasn't our mission. In fact, we weren't allowed to even engage them if we were going out on a mission because our mission was to support the ground troops.
Oh, okay.
And we had pilots on the ground with the ground people, and they would call in our targets to us, what we're supposed to dive bomb and strafe and so.
Right.
So the only time I got a couple. Coming back from a mission, of course, if you saw a German aircraft, you could go after. But the 109, the German airplanes were a little faster, more maneuverable than the Jug. I did get a good shot on one day that I got on his tail, but he tried to stall me out at a steep climbing turn, which was their strategy.
Right.
And I knew that, so I wasn't going to have any part of that. I got a shot at him, but I don't think I hit him.
Who was it? Gabraski? Who was the
Well, Gabreski was the 8th Air Force and flying escort out of England. Gabreski and
he was P-47s, right?
Yeah, they were flying P-57s, but later in the war they transitioned all to 51s because the 51s had longer range.
Gotcha.
But Gabreski and Zemke were both prisoners of war in the same prison camp that my flying buddy was at the end of the war.
Uh-huh.
He was up in Estonia for 3 months in a prison camp. He lost his engine on a P-51 going to Berlin and had to bail out. He wasn't injured, but he was taken prisoner.
Right. Oh, that is amazing. And what did you do after the war?
Well, I came home. I had an opportunity to stay in and get a regular Army commission. I was offered that, and I rejected it. I didn't think I wanted a military life.
Right.
So I came home and went to college and became a CPA and CPA practice all my whole career.
Did you ever continue civilian flying?
Oh, yes. Did a lot of civilian flying. Owned or co-owned a number of airplanes. But I quit at age 50 when I realized my daughter was in college about 100 miles away, and my son was getting married, and my daughter was in the wedding party. And she had a final that day, so I said, "Don't worry, I'll fly down. There's a little strip near the college. I'll pick you up and fly you home." And it was a early summer, and I realized I was having trouble with simple things like holding altitude for holding direct flying. And I said, if I'm not going to devote enough time to maintain proficiency, I better quit flying. And that's what I did.
Right.
So took up bicycling.
Awesome.
A lot cheaper.
Yeah, a lot cheaper, exactly. Well, what was the scariest moment you ever had flying? Because, I mean, aviation is inherently dangerous. But what was the scariest, like you almost crapped your pants? We all have that moment where the hair goes on fire in the back of your neck.
Well, my 75th mission, the American armies had stopped at the Elbe River, according to the agreement with Stalin. Weren't going to penetrate farther east than that. So the front was very stable. We really weren't flying many missions. They called an 8-plane mission one day to go over and see where the Russians were, I guess, and to see what damage we could do. And on that mission, I don't remember, we didn't find anything of any note, but on our way back to base, and my wingman called me and said, "Look at that huge cannon down there." And we knew the Germans had huge cannons. In World War I, they shelled Paris from 75 miles away with these huge cannons. I said to him, he was a Texan, by the way, and I said, "We don't have any bombs. All we got is machine guns. We can't do any damage to that huge cannon." He said, "Yeah, but the next mission out, might be able to do something to them." Okay, so I set the rest of the flight back to base, and we were virtually within sight of the Elbe River, which was the front lines.
Mm-hmm.
And And I said, we'll go down, just take a pass and look at it, see if it's real or is it a dummy. And so we went sailing down there and looking at it about 75 feet off the ground. And I got hit by light flak and knew I was hit. So I pulled up and I knew an engine wasn't functioning totally and headed for the Elbe River, which wasn't that far away.
Uh-huh.
But I knew I was on fire. I knew I was burning. I guess my wingman called me and says, you're on fire. And of course, in a Thunderbolt, you sit on the main fuel cell.
Right.
so I'm flying along. I jettisoned the canopy because I thought if this thing blows up, it might blow me out. And when I looked down between the rudder pedals, to my feet, the rudder pedals, the armor plate was melting, just like a acetylene torch was cutting it.
Yeah.
And I said, it's time to get out of this bird. So out I went, and I was rather low. It was really almost too low to bail out. But chute opened up, and the civilians on the ground were firing at me with rifles. The German army had given all the civilian men, who were all old by this time, all the young ones are gone, had given them rifles, and fortunately their aim wasn't too good. I could hear the bullets going by, and I could see the holes in my parachute.
Oh, God.
Well, I was very fortunate. They captured me and took me into this. Of course, I was stunned, and I thought I had broken a leg when I landed.
Mm-hmm.
I was burned, and they took me in the same house that I just cleared coming down. And the must have been a medic or something, because he had some sulfur powder, no packets, little paper packets, and he had a head back that covered my face with that sulfur where I was burned. He was going to just start to work on my wrists, which were between the flying jacket and my gloves where they're burned. And the door banged open, and two young German soldiers with burp guns, that was a mass-produced automatic weapon,
Mm-hmm.
they had wrapped me across the head with a burp gun, knocked me off the stool. They were not very friendly.
Were they Russians or Germans?
Germans.
Wow.
And and they had been sent by their commander who had seen me bail out. It was a flak position. The German army, the Luftwaffe, manned the anti-aircraft guns. And they were more passionate with pilots than would be other service people. So they got me up, marched me out of the house. By this time, there were about 25 or 30 people congregated in the courtyard in front of the house. They were welcoming me to Germany by spitting on me and hitting me with sticks, so forth. They let them cleared away, and we started marching me up the road to out of town. And I was hobbling around, so they gave me their little motorbike that they had arrived at. Out of town, I hobbled up the road for a while, and of course I was pretty well panicked by this time. But a strange thing happened. Suddenly, I just felt a total complacency, a total sense of peace. And I said I'd always been a Christian, always gone to Sunday school. Never thought about God. And as soon as I mentioned his God, that's when just someone turned a switch. And from that point on, I really didn't care. I'm saved. It wasn't the fact that I was not going to die.
Yeah.
It was just whatever happened was going to happen.
Right.
So they were marching me up this road, and I'm getting kind of weak. And they stopped under a big tree heading out in the wood, out in the open territory. And they motioned for me to get on the bike and ride it. They made some signals, and our intelligence had told us, don't ever do this, because as soon as you get on the bike and ride, they shoot you and claim you're escaping. So I determined that if they were going to shoot me, they were going to shoot me looking me right in the eye. So I moved up closer to them. They were just younger. They were 15 years old, or maybe even 14. They're just young kids. Of course, so was I. Anyway, and they talked to each other, and then they put their guns back on safety and told me to keep moving. So I got up to got up to their flak position where they were dug in. And the captain, German captain, had seen me bail out and had sent those two down to rescue me from the civilians. And I was greeted by a great big German soldier, enlisted man, looked like a giant. He probably was like 6'2" or 3. He grabbed me by a flying jacket and was going to rearrange my dentures. And the captain jumped between them, and he was just a little guy. And he just was screaming in the face of this guy. And what I could tell her, this is how would you like our pilots treated like that? So eventually I got, they radioed a telephone somewhere in a car, showed up with two German officers in an open Mercedes convertible. And they headed right back into town where I bailed out.
Right.
In this car. They're taking me out in the back seat, they're two in the front seat. And it was a lot right going along the Elbe River. And they made a big left turn to the main street of this little village or town where there's no front yards, the houses are built right on the street. All of a sudden they stopped the car, jumped out and quickly and ran into a house, left me sitting in the car. And I said, well, this is strange. Well, then I heard the first B-47 starting down on a dive bomb run. So I knew what was going on. And so I hobbled out of the car into the house. I didn't have enough energy to, they'd disappeared. I think down in the basement, they'd gone down the basement because there was a stairway down, there was a stairway up. And there was a little blonde German girl, couldn't have been 2 or 3 years old, sitting on that step. So I sat there with her, and she sat just there while this bombing raid was going on. And she just looked at me like I was from the zoo. But shortly after B-47s left, and they came up and put me back in a car and took me up to a big military base. It had a big building, multi-story brick building, stone building. It was apparently had been a hospital. And the same thing happened. They pulled up near this one corner of the building, and out of the car they jumped and ran down this ramp that you could drive a car down, and you could actually drive a car into the basement if they had big double doors. And I'm sitting in again, and same thing happened. I heard the P-47 starting down. So I hobbled down to that ramp and got just inside the door and just sort of collapsed onto the floor. And a German enlisted man came out from the bowels of this building, it's dark, and stood with me the whole time that raid was going on. Just stood beside me. He wasn't guarding me. He didn't have any weapon. I think he was just showing some compassion. And then when they went away, they took me up to the upstairs, the first floor, to a Wehrmacht, German regular army major. And he was in a big office. It looked like a movie set. His uniform was immaculate. His shoes were polished, starched shirt. And it's so surreal because here Germany was dying minute by minute. And yet you'd think they were sitting for a film shot. And he had my escape kit open on his desk and my dog tags and started to interrogate me. I was giving him the Geneva Convention name, rank, serial number and stuff. And he asked me 3 times. He finally said in English, "Oh, so you're going to be a tough guy." And so at that moment, just as I wasn't feeling very good about this time, and the big double doors in this room banged open. No knock, just banged open. Here comes a Luftwaffe major. And they engaged in Heil Hitler. They engaged in this conversation. I knew what he was telling us. The Wehrmacht had no authority to interrogate an air crew person. It was strictly a Luftwaffe operation. And after they got done shouting at each other, the Luftwaffe major put his hand on my shoulder and got my dog bags back and gave them to me and called an orderly to take me downstairs to the clinic, a little room in the clinic. And so they took me down there, sat in this little room, probably 10 by 12, and they were bringing in the wounded Germans from this bombing raid on stretchers. And they were laying there. I'm sitting there looking at them, and they're looking at me. When they disposed, when take care of all, they got me on the table, said they can't tell whether my ankle was broken because it was by this time it was swollen too much. And so he said to me, "You're a lucky fellow," in English. He could speak some English. I agreed. Yes, I was pretty lucky to be alive at this point. And he said, no. He said, that village killed a bomber crew yesterday. So putting his story together, the flak officer at the flak position had sent those guys in to rescue me from the civilians.
Wow, you were lucky.
Yes, very lucky. And this.
Wait, what day was this? What month?
This was in April 18th.
45?
45, yes.
So you weren't a POW that long?
No,
Blessed.
I never really was a POW because the story gets even more intense than this. The German doctor had put some salve on my legs and wrists, and he said, we don't have any. He wanted to give me a shot, and I wasn't ready to have him give me a shot. And I took my dog tags and showed him the T on it. I had a tetanus shot. And so he said, okay, you're going to give me a tetanus shot. So it called some orders. They took me back up the second floor of this building and had a padded cell, probably for mental patients or something. Dark little window in the door. And one window in the room had bars on it. And slammed it shut. And this time it's late afternoon. And I just at that point, I just collapsed. And laid down on the bed. Was a single cot in this room, no other furniture, and had a big coarse blanket on the cot. And sometime during that, I woke up and my face was glued to this blanket where my burns had been oozing. Yeah. So, but then the next night, very next night, I was in that room all day. I guess they gave me something to drink or something to eat, but not much because they didn't have anything. The door bangs open about dusk, and here's 3 American GIs, or prisoners of the Germans, and they had some crutches for me, and said, we're evacuating this facility. Where the Russians were getting close. And so I hobbled down the stairs and out in the road. And by now it's been dark. It was starting to rain lightly. And I couldn't operate those crutches. It took some dexterity, and I didn't have it. So they realized this before we got out of the parking lot of this building. One ran back and got a wooden stretcher, piece of wood with canvas. The 3 of them put me on there, and they rotated, carried me, put my flying jacket over me. And we walked down this road. And the road was filled with people just walking. I mean, it was surreal.
Did you have guards guarding you, or
no? And I know where these 3 GIs fit into this picture. They weren't injured; they were healthy. But I felt sorry for them because carrying, even though they were rotating one guy occasionally, but it was heavy, dead weight,
right?
Big old heavy stretcher. And we walked how long I don't know, but it was every once in a while a horse-drawn vehicle would go by, but mostly it was total silence. People weren't talking to each other. It was like a human river.
Mm-hmm.
It was dark; you couldn't see much. And a half-track ambulance came along, and the GI stopped it, and they put me in that ambulance. There was no one else in it except a young medical guy who spoke perfect English. And where they took me, which was dark, can't see out of that box. But we drove some miles, and it took me to a little frame cottage, 1.5-story cottage with an unfinished attic. And there was a German medical unit that usually worked behind the front lines. And there they looked at me and gave me a diagnosis card, a tag, which was a red bordered tag, which indicated I was a prisoner, and took me upstairs into this attic. And there were about 8 other GIs up there who'd been wounded that they had. None of them could communicate. They're all unconscious or not communicating. And just so happened there was a German-American officer whose family had migrated from Germany in the early 30s. He attended law school in Cleveland, Ohio, and was assigned to military government naturally. And he could speak German. He had legal knowledge. And his driver had wandered into the German lines somehow before the armies got to the Elbe, and was taken prisoner. He was supposedly shot in the leg. Well, he was perfectly inventory. I was suspicious of this American officer that had a deep German accent, but he turned out to be legitimate. And he and the German medical doctor were real because they could communicate with each other. That's my source of knowledge about what was happening. And about 3 days later, this German doctor sent the German female nurses to the American bridgehead. He didn't want them captured by the Russians. And they'd been on the Russian front. They still were on the Russian front, but the Russian front now is almost up to Berlin. And so that they sent the nurses back. And then a week later, he realized that these men that he had were going to die if they didn't get medical treatment. So he, commander, somehow got 2 ambulances, had the fuel, loaded these 8 prisoners, 4 in each ambulance, and the German-American captain and the German captain took them across the Elbe River, turned them over to the Americans so they get medical treatment.
And turned himself in so he didn't get stuck with the Russians.
Yeah, well,
the Germans, smart.
Well, but yeah, you'd say, well, I was just his hostage, guaranteed to surrender to the Americans, because Hitler had given orders to shoot anybody that was trying to surrender to the Americans. And so when they got back, the next day we started really hiding out. By this time, there's only a couple of German non-coms, a German doctor, and myself, and one other American enlisted man who was mobile. I wasn't very mobile, of course. We spent one night in a collective farm where they had slave laborers and guys with striped suits.
Mm-hmm.
One afternoon, and one of the door or upstairs in a room with straw and a floor to sleep on. And this middle European guy with a striped suit came in and had a package of what we'd call rye crisp crackers and some lard and some beet sugar. And this was like gold because they had no food. They were starving. And he wanted to thank the Americans for coming to liberate them. The next night we went in the woods someplace, and so we slept in the ambulances that night.
Right.
The third morning after this, we ended up in a castle. I mean, it looked like a Hollywood script, a real castle. Has to shoot armor inside the door, big tall door, a moat around it. And as we arrived, this poor tired horse was attached to a wagon loaded with furniture, and a servant was sitting up on a box to drive, and the lady that owned the castle came out with a big ring of keys and gave it to the German captain. They were conversing. So then we all went in through the door. I was hobbling along, went up the circular stone stairs up to the second floor into the largest bedroom I'd ever seen. I mean, it's huge. And the bed was the biggest bed I've ever seen. And the German captain went over and stood at the window looking down this tree-lined lane to the main road. It wasn't very made. It was bigger than their driveway. And just stood there in a typical German pose with his hands behind him. And after the horse and cart had gone down to the road, he turned around and said something in German, and they all just burst out laughing. And I asked the German American, "What's the joke here?" He said, "Well, when we pulled up here, she gave him the keys and said, 'Now these are the keys to the fruit cellar, to the food downstairs. And if the Russians get close, I want you to destroy all the food.' And when he turned around, he said, 'The Russians are close enough. Let's eat.'" So they scrounged up a camp stove somewhere and brought up the room. They brought up these jars of pickled potatoes and green beans and beef or.
And this is on your way back to the American lines, right?
No, we're still meeting the SS at this time.
So you're not over to the American lines
Oh,
yet?
no, we're some miles away from the American lines.
Okay.
In fact, I have no idea where we were.
Right.
But then, so we had a big feast. Everybody had, and I know there must have been 5 of us laid on this bedside. It was that large, we could lay side by side. And I
Right.
fell asleep. And the German-American captain says, we're making a break for it tonight. We're going to the American lines after dark. So guess what? Up about after dark, 2 Mercedes convertibles, big Mercedes. Where this guy got them, I have no idea. I don't know what happened to the ambulances. We hadn't got the gas. So about after midnight, we started without any lights on back country road, just lanes, trying to not encounter any German patrols, which of course there were none because all the Germans had gone into Berlin to defeat. Now we have stopped outside a little village, little crossroads, and the American captain came back to the second car that I was riding in and said, the German officer and I are going to walk down this road and see if we can make contact with the American lines. We understand that they're not far away. And before he could finish that conversation, a Jeep came roaring around the corner with a mounted 50 caliber on the back, 2 guys in it. And he explained what we wanted. And he said, okay, just follow us. So we then proceeded to the bridgehead. And they'd stop occasionally. They'd drag the big anti-tank mines off the street. You hear them dragging these big iron mines off the road. And then across the Elbe River and up the American side. And then I went to the medical unit because I was getting in pretty bad shape at that time. And then the next, after a day there, I was flown down to southern France to a hospital that the Americans had taken over, French hospital. That was somewhere around Dijon, I think.
How long did it take you to recoup?
2 months.
2 months.
I was there 2 months. So, because the burns wouldn't heal, they wanted to schedule surgery, skin grafts on my legs, and every time they'd unwrap it, there was more infection. So finally, after a couple of months, I'm getting pretty anxious. I'm bugging them to go home. I wanted to get out of there. And so they gave me some bandages and some salve and dismissed me. And by this time, all the repatriation camps had closed. Over the name Licky Strike, Camel, and some after cigarettes.
Yeah.
And they were only in business to get these troops back to the United States. Not only prisoners, but when troops are going to go on the Pacific front. So it was another few weeks fussing around trying to convince them that they had to send me out of the theater because the terms of the surrender required that all prisoners of war had to leave the theater.
Right.
Which was a wise move. They didn't want anybody out there having retribution on each other. So I finally, after a couple of weeks, went to Worms, Germany, and they didn't know what to do with me. Then back to Compiègne, France, north of Paris. They didn't know what to do with me. And finally ended up at Antwerp on the beach one midnight. Of course, you always get to night in the army on a train. And it was loaded with people who were being repatriated. And guys called off names and put them in trucks. It came to 3 or 4 of us that were standing there and said, who are you guys? So we just came on this train. I don't have any orders for you. I don't know who you are. So he said, but get one of these trucks. I'll take you to the base, which is tents along the river, along the estuary. And there was by this time, the only other officer with me had been an infantry officer.
Right.
He was from Southern Ohio. And he said, we're going to have this stuff that morning at 8 o'clock, we're going down to commandant this place. We're going to finally get down. So we did. Next morning we got up, went down and gave him our sad story. He clucked his tongue and said, okay, I'll take care of it. So, okay. So anyway, the next day we got on a Liberty ship loaded with cargo, tanks and trucks, and it's headed for Boston.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I'm going to give you my card. Please stay in contact with me. Where do you live?
That's north of Pittsburgh, about 40 miles.
Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed just those few short interviews I had. Unfortunately, the day was taken up with transportation back and forth to the airport. not enough time to sit down and talk to every single guy. My biggest regret, I wish that they were here for about 3 days prior, that I could grab each individual vet and capture his story. But I hope you enjoyed just the few that I got. Highly recommend, if you get a chance, raise your hand, volunteer for any and all opportunities out there. You never know what's going to happen. You just have to say yes. And if you get that chance, then you get invited to all sorts of different events if they know that you're willing to work and have fun. So until next time, you guys have a great one. Next week, I am bringing on Nicholas Laidlaw. Just wrote this book. He's a Marine, former Marine sergeant, and he started Battles and Beer. Or actually, it's, Battles and Beer, which is military history. He's going to come on the show. He's been collecting stories and vignettes from folks for a while, and we're going to find out how long. Basically, if you read through this thing, some of them are pages long, some of them are just paragraphs, but they're still very entertaining and great reading. Real raw, the stories he's captured. So we'll find out more about Nick and what he's got going on. Until next week, you guys have a good one. Thanks for joining me on December 7th. Apologize that it's a pre-recorded deal, but of course I only had access to a couple guys on December 2nd. So until next Tuesday, tip your waiters and waitresses when you go out and get a taco. Enjoy your day, and I will catch you guys next week. See you now. Thanks so much. Oh, don't forget, hit like, subscribe, hit the bell, the little bell down there on YouTube. Hit the taco bell, and we'll get you signed up, which will let you know any future shows that I have coming on. You guys take care until then.